Hey everyone, it's Allie, and today we're going to be talking about Warlock, which is the third and final mastery for the Acolyte class in Last Epoch. This is a class that honestly brings some very much needed synergy for curses, and oh boy, is this mastery strong. Warlock is going to be a mastery that's going to be primarily focused on dealing with damage over time. It is such a versatile class that you can play any sort of damage over time build that you want on it. If you want to play Ignite or Damned or Bleed or Poison, you can do all of those very easily. And Warlock has plenty of synergy and plenty of support for those different playstyles. And all the skills are going to work fairly well with all those different playstyles. And in my opinion, is going to make for a very strong toolkit and in my opinion, maybe a little bit too overpowered of a toolkit. I have been a really big enjoyer of dot builds in Last Epoch, and I would say probably around 70 to 80% of my total playtime in the game has been on dot builds. I just love the way dot builds work in this game and the way they scale, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute if you don't know how dots work in this game. And on launch, which is going to be on February 21st, I was personally planning to probably play an Autobomber or to play a minion build. But with how strong Warlock looks and with how strong one potential build I already see for the build looks, which we'll talk about more towards the end of the video, I think I might personally just go Warlock because this class not only looks very fun, but also very, very strong. So why don't we first start talking about all the skills that Warlock is going to bring and what they're going to do. And then from there, we'll talk about the passive tree and all the interactions. And finally, I'll go over a potential build that I see for this mastery, which I'll most likely be making a full guide on just because it looks really strong and really fun. So the first thing I want to mention is that all this info was first revealed on Icy Veins, and that's where all of it has come from. But I'm going to personally be reviewing everything through Maxwell's site just because I am a very visual person. And to me, just being able to visually look at a representation of both the passive tree and the skills are going to make it a little bit easier for me to explain and get my thoughts out on them a little bit easier. But if you do want to look at all these reveals, I'll have a link for Icy Veins in the description below. So the first skill that I want to talk about is going to be Chaos Bolt. Now, Chaos Bolt is going to look like a very strong skill. It's going to be a multi-hit skill that has really good effectiveness of added damage. So if you scale the added damage just even a little bit, it should do really good damage. And you can both play it as a hit build and you can potentially play as a dot build. And I think the dot build is going to be absolutely cracked. So with Chaos Bolt, if you want to play as a hit build, we can first go Exalted Misery, which is going to give you a lot of added hit damage if you have different ailments applied onto an enemy. And the nice thing is you can have both Condemned to Chaos and you have Mania and Flames as leading points to it. You're going to get damned ignited very easily and you just have to find a way to get Frostbin and bleed into your build. Now, to add on to this, you can also pick up Doom's Vindication, which is going to give you 16% more damage and an additional 16% if the enemy is cursed. And this is very easy to do because Warlock has access to a lot of new curses, which are very easy to apply through the build. Other nice thing with this as well is you can potentially convert it to cold and then get yourself Frostbite this way, as well as getting a 6% chance to deal double hit damage. And if you really want to full focus on this hit base setup of Chaos Bolt, you can opt to get Chthonic Aurora, which can give you a lot more projectiles, but it's going to amp the mana cost of it quite heavily. And you can potentially pick up Mana Anarchy, which makes it have even more damage. And it's a leading point to Chains of the Betrayer, which is really, really cool. If you know about a Destruction Warlock in World of Warcraft, this basically turns Chaos Bolt into Chaos Bolt. Just like Destruction Warlock in WoW, where all of your projectiles are gone. You're only going to shoot one massive Chaos Bolt, and that Chaos Bolt is going to do 50% more damage per projectile. So if you were to take all points in Chaotic Aurora for +4 projectiles, that would give you 200% more damage for chains. And then if you stack it with the 70% more damage between these two nodes, and if you stack it with the chance to deal double damage, you might potentially have some Chaos Bolts that do a silly amount of damage. And this might be the new highest hitting skill in the game, especially when we pair with some points in the passive tree, and if we pair with some crit chance. Now, the other version of the skill that I'm interested in, and I feel like it's going to be an S tier build in the game at launch, and probably going to be the build that I'm going to play at launch at this point because it just seems so good, is going to be the bleed version of it with Sanguine Ravine. Now, what this is going to do is going to turn it from a necrotic skill into a physical skill, and it's going to turn all damn chance into bleed chance, which allows you to scale it with some of the points in the Lich passive tree as well as the Warlock passive tree. And the reason this looks so good and so strong to me is because you can kind of turn this into an Autobomber where you can have it not only be automatically casted for you, but also have it automatically cast Rip Bloods, Bone Curses, and harvest automatically. And the really cool thing here is you have even more synergy. So for example, with the points that makes you automatically cast Rip Bloods, you have a 1% chance every time Chaos Bolt hits to cast a Rip Blood per intelligence. So if I have 100 int, that means every time Chaos Bolt hits, and since we do multiple hits, each one of the hits from a single cast is going to trigger a Rip Blood. That means I get 3 free Rip Bloods per second. And Rip Blood has typically been a skill that's been kind of neglected just because it hasn't had much synergy with many things. It just hasn't been strong overall. Typically, you might play with the points at the bottom that make it so buffs your minions. But one interesting thing you could do here with this is you could also pick up Gushing Moon, which is going to make it so your Rip Blood has a 100% chance to bleed. And very quickly, if you don't know how ailments work in Last Epoch, I just want to very quickly go over it since I know a lot of my audience plays Path of Exile. And the way ailments and all damage over times work in Last Epoch are a little bit different than pretty much every other RPG. So in this game, nothing has a limit to how many times you can stack. So for example, if I had a 100% chance to bleed on ability and I attack with it twice, that means I'll get 2 separate bleed instances and both of them do damage at the same time. The other thing to mention here is if I have, for example, 200% chance to bleed, my ability will instead apply 2 bleeds. And if I had, for example, 150% chance to bleed, that means I would have a guaranteed bleed and a 50% chance for an additional bleed every time I attack. This means that with Rip Blood, and because getting 3 Rip Bloods per second from this is very easy to do, we effectively are getting 3 additional free Rip Bloods. And with the rest of the tree, we can make Rip Blood into a really, really strong way to heal this build and potentially a way to get clear. So we can pick up Splatter, which makes the Rip Bloods AoE, and it's going to give you quite a lot of extra clear. And the nice thing here is we can potentially pick up Blood Tight, which is going to massively reduce the mana cost of Chaos Bolts, meaning we can pick up something like Abrupt Chaos from our cast speed, with the downside being that every cast is going to consume your health. But the special thing about Rip Blood is every time you cast it, a little blood orb is going to come back to you that's going to heal you for 10 health. What we can do is we can also pick up Quenching, which is not only going to make the orbs come back to us faster, but heal us more. So 4 points in this, our blood orbs are going to heal 30 total. And because of passive points, that makes us cast Rip Bloods for free, scales off of Int. What we could do is pick up Hemology, which makes it so the blood orbs restore 5 additional health per Int. So at 100% Int, that means we're healing 150 per blood orb or 750 life total per second from all the free Rip Bloods that we're doing, meaning we can get a lot of free healing, and with all that free healing, we can very easily sustain Blood Tithe for free. Another really interesting thing here is because this wants you to be an int stacker, you could potentially go for the right side instead and have it give you ward, which means you can suddenly have very, very large ward amounts through Arcane Fortress. The other really cool thing about this is the ability to cast free Bone Curses through another affliction. Now, Warlock is going to have a lot of curse synergy, which honestly, Acolyte overall really, really needed. And I'm happy that has so many cool things I can do with curses. And another affliction, in my opinion, is going to be very, very strong with Chaos Bolt. So Bone Curse, what it does is it applies a curse for 8 seconds to an enemy, and every time that enemy gets hit, it takes damage, and the damage is tripled if you hit it yourself. Now, the cool thing here is that Chaos Bolt does multiple hits, and Bone Curse has no limit to how fast it can be procced. And the really nice thing about all this is that once you pick up Chaos Bolts, which you can do maybe about 30 minutes into the game, you just need to put 1 point into Condemned to Chaos, 1 point into Sanguine Revere, and then 1 point into another affliction. So for 3 passive points in total, which you'll get very, very quickly, you'll be able to pick up this synergy. And because Bone Curse does triple damage if you specifically deal the damage, and because Chaos Bolt is going to do so many tiny hits, you are going to be able to have a very easy leveling time with all this, just because the Bone Curse is going to do so much damage, they'll kill everything really quickly. The other thing to mention here is it has even more synergy with bleeding, by you being able to pick up Defiled Defenses, which is going to give you Armor Shred, which is a really big damage amp, and Coven Flesh, which effectively gives you an additional 75% chance to bleed every time you hit something that has Bone Curse on it, giving you a really, really high bleed chance very quickly. You can also pair with Conflation, which makes it hit a really big area, and you can potentially pick up Sigil of Morality, which is going to give you Mark for Death, which is a really big damage amp, which is very difficult to get in most builds, and then either make it so it's always active on one target while making the Bone Curse itself do a lot more damage, or make it last longer so you can have Mark for Death on everything. Point is, that Chaos Bolts with bleed is going to be very, very strong. It's going to do quite a lot of damage. And the fact that you can get free Rip Bloods, making it so you either have just a lot of free health regen or a way to basically make it so you have no mana problems ever. And have free Bone Curse, which is going to be really strong at all points in the build, especially because Warlock with its passive tree has really strong synergy with curses where you can take less damage and deal more damage to enemies that are cursed. This is going to be a very strong leveling setup, and there's more synergy with this than the rest of the Warlock skills that's going to make it a really strong package overall. Moving on next, let's talk about Ghostflame. Now, this skill I'm really excited for. It's going to have so much utility, and this skill could just be a build on its own. So what Ghostflame does is a channeled skill, and while you channel it, you are going to deal fire and necrotic damage over time. Now, the cool thing about this is you can potentially pick up points that turn into the mobility skill. And the really cool thing about using this as your mobility skill over anything else is the fact that you can reduce the damage you take by an ungodly amount. So first off, with Ghostflame, we have the Stain. The Stain's just going to make you take 40% less damage while channeling. Then we also have Enfeebled Prey, which is going to make you take 20% less damage if an enemy is cursed. So on a boss fight, some synergy that you could have with Ghostflame is using Bleed Chaos Bolts to apply free bone curses. And since these bone curses are going to have permanent uptime, if a boss is going to do some sort of big hit that you're scared about, you just simply start channeling Ghostflame to get a free 60% damage reduction. Not only that, but you're also going to be able to take Dark Protections from the passive tree, which is going to make you take 2% less damage from anything that is cursed. And you can take Doom Herald, which is going to make you take 24% less damage while channeling at the same time. Meaning if you were to stack all these together, when you press Ghostflame, you are just going to take 84% less total damage, which is going to make you so tanky, and it's going to make you live most one-shots pretty easily. It's going to make boss fights a lot easier. Now, if you want to talk about the movement skill version of Ghostflame, it's going to be really cool in my opinion. So we have Spirit of the Dead, which is going to be required to be able to make into movement skill. The downside here is that the channeling cost will go up 60%, but we're most likely going to want to pick up Spectral Menace, which is going to reduce the channel cost by 70%. And we can also pick up Harrowed Path, reduced it by another 30%, but at the same time losing the movement speed from it, which can be made up with Doom Surge to gain most of it back. With this combo, what would happen is your channel cost is going to be pretty low, and because Spectral Menace is going to give you whatever current mana you have as word while channeling, you are going to be able to get quite a lot of word, which means you're going to be able to either build up a really big buffer as you're running around before you fight something, or you're just going to be able to heal yourself if you're playing some sort of word build. The other really nice thing here is you can combine it with the Cultist Mind, which gives you 1 mana per intelligence. So if you're playing some sort of word and base build, reducing the channel cost by so much means you can have a really big mana pool for longer because you can't regenerate mana during Ghostflame. And that means you're going to be able to get a lot more word a lot faster through the massive amount of extra mana that you're going to be able to get. The other really cool part of Ghostflame is the left side. So what you can instead do is you can instead turn this into either a Ignite or Damned Duration based skill, where you can pick up a Cultist Embers to gain a lot of Ignite and Damned Duration per int. So if you were to play this as an int stacker, you can make your Ignites last for a very long time, which has really good synergy with Flames of Misery, because it's also going to make it so you also gain your Ignite chance and your Damn chance as Ignite and Damn chance over time. And what you could do is you could also pick up Decrepit Moralis, which is going to make it so it applies Decrepify for 10 seconds. And what Decrepify does is one of the new curses, which is going to make it so the enemy takes more damage over time from damage over times. So that means if you pair with a Cultist Embers and Flames of Misery, you have yourself a really strong dot skill. And if you want to play this as a bleed skill, you can pick up Artemis of Malice, which is going to turn it into bleed skill instead. You're going to get a lot of leech through Phantom Transfusion, which is going to keep you very tinky while running around. And you can potentially, if you don't want to use it as a mobility skill, just use it as some sort of channel skill. Pick up Feast of Bones, which is going to make you automatically cast Mara Shards up to 2 times per second, which can be increased with Feel of Anguish, meaning you can potentially have some sort of auto casting build where you're applying a lot of bleeds through this, and then you're also playing Mara Shards, which is also applying more bleeds. And then Mara Shards itself can also manually trigger Rip Blood for you, making this some sort of auto trigger build with bleeding in it, which can be really, really cool. Finally, another really cool thing you could do with the whole damage version of Ghostflame is you could potentially go over and pick up Immemorial Flames, which is going to make it so if you channel it for 1 second, you will make a stationary Ghostflame for 2.5 seconds. And then you can combine that with Unending Ruin to make it last even longer. While this would be kind of hard to deal with the mana problems, you would be able to potentially just put this down, have this do a lot of damage for you, and then be able to press some sort of other skill at the same time, giving you a lot more DPS. Moving on, next we have Soul Feast. Now, Soul Feast is a skill I'm really, really excited about because it has so much potential on what it could do. Now, a lot of my audience plays PoE, so I'm going to use this reference here because I think everyone's going to immediately know what I'm talking about here. But Soul Feast is effectively the contagion part of Essence Drain Contagion. At least it has the ability to do that, which in my opinion, I think is really cool because it's going to turn a skill that typically has only been used as a leveling skill into potentially a very strong endgame build. The other thing about Soul Feast is you could potentially just use it as a damaging skill itself or a really nice utility skill for some of your other builds by either making it heal you or give you more damage. So the first thing I want to talk about for Soul Feast is going to specifically be the new playstyle that allows. The point that we care about here is going to be Another Strife. So what Soul Feast does itself is it attacks all enemies that are currently cursed. You can pick up Grand Imprint if you want to use it as a standalone skill, but otherwise Soul Feast doesn't do anything if monsters aren't cursed. Now, before Warlock came out, there were 2 curses in the game. We had both Bone Curse and we had Spirit Plague. We talked about Bone Curse and how that's going to be good with Chaos Bolts, but Spirit Plague has mostly just been a skill that was only used while leveling. Spirit Plague is absolutely cracked for leveling. It's really good at early levels, and it's basically the way to speed level pretty much every single accolade. But past that, its clear isn't really good unless you pick up Calamitous, which kind of bricks the skill because it's going to give it such a high mana cost. They're not going to be able to play it the way it's intended to be played. Well, the really cool thing about Soul Feast is that we can pick up another Strife. And what another Strife is going to do is it's going to make it so any of your other curses are going to automatically be spread up to a certain amount of enemies within 5 meters. So the way I could play this is I could play Spirit Plague with no Calamitous, which would give us automatic spread every time we cast it. And what I could do is press one Spirit Plague and then press a Soul Feast. And then this Soul Feast is going to spread the Spirit Plague to 3 additional enemies. And then I press it again. And then those 3 enemies are then going to spread it to 3 more enemies. So suddenly, with 2 button presses, I can spread it to 12 enemies in total. Meaning this might give you a really fun playstyle of press a Spirit Plague, spam some Soul Feast, which is going to do damage itself, then go to the next pack, press a Spirit Plague, then through another Strife and spam a bunch of Soul Feasts, you're going to just immediately hit the whole pack. And I think that this is going to be a really fun playstyle. It's going to feel very much like EDC does in PoE. The other really cool thing about Soul Feast is every time you do press it, you will suck soul fragments from the enemies, which come back to you and give you ward. And with Celerity, we can make it so these soul fragments give us haste when they come to us, meaning we will get movement speed, so it'll be really fast. And we can pick up Withering Maw, which is going to make it so enemies take more damage from curses, which Spirit Plague is a curse. Not only does Soul Feast give us a way to make Spirit Plague feel really good for clear, it also at the same time just makes it do more damage. I think Soul Feast is going to be really cool, and I really want to see how this Soul Feast Spirit Plague setup plays, and I want to see if this is going to be a viable way to level characters from now on, or if it's just going to be a really strong clear / bossing build in the future. Moving on, next we have Profane Veil. Now Profane Veil is going to be another utility skill, but it's going to do something that honestly no other skill does in the game. So what Profane Veil does is for 2 seconds, you dodge every single hit that is made against you, making you effectively immune for 2 seconds, but it will let all damage of time go through, and you will move slower while channeling it. One thing you can do with this is you can then pick up Single-Minded, which gives you a lot of the movement speed that you lose back, as well as massively reducing the cooldown recovery speed of it, but reducing the duration of it, which effectively allows you to use Profane Veil as a dodge. If you think about a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, where your dodge effectively gives you immunity frames while you are rolling around, this kind of will do the same thing, where you can use Profane Veil as a way to quickly reposition yourself while also effectively having immunity frames, which I think is really sick. Now, another way to play Profane Veil, which I think might be really cool, is to go with Heretic's Flame, which is going to make it so it applies ignites, and then pick up yourself Profane Form, which is going to not only give you a lot of movement speed per ignite chance, meaning that you are going to zoom really fast while this is active if you're playing an ignite build, but also at the same time allow it to ignite with Hellflame, allowing you to potentially play some sort of build where you are pressing Profane Flame, you are applying a massive amount of ignites to everything around you, and you're clearing really fast. And then you have some sort of other skill to either kill rares or bosses, and you're using this as a way to clear really quickly. Finally, the other use case for Profane Veil might be to go to the top right and pick up Profane Orbs. And these look really interesting because they are going to seek out enemies automatically. You'd also pick up Hex Flurry, which is going to make it so they spawn 4% faster per 1% cast speed that you have for your curses, which you can pick up on the Warlock tree, and you can stack generic cast speed, meaning with enough cast speed, you might be able to make some sort of build where you're pressing Profane Veil and you are just spamming a lot of orbs really quickly. And because those orbs deal 60% more damage per curse you have on the enemy, you might make some sort of build where you're applying a lot of curses and you have a lot of cast speed, which would be really easy to do because you're going to stack a lot of cast speed to apply those curses faster. And then those orbs are going to do a massive amount of damage while you simply run around or you're on a boss. I think Profane Veil is kind of cool. And I really like that you can kind of just turn it into a Elden Ring or Dark Souls style dodge roll with immunity frames. I think that is going to be a really cool use case. I think a lot of people are going to have some fun with that. And lastly, we have Chthonic Fissure. Now, this is the skill I am most excited about next to Chaos Bolt. Chthonic Fissure and Chaos Bolt together are going to make a really strong synergized build, and I think that this is going to be what's going to turn Chaotic Bolt into an absolute S tier build. So what Chthonic Fissure does is it just makes a giant line in front of you, and out of that line, spirits are going to come out and automatically seek enemies, apply a new curse to them, Torment, which is going to make them move slower, and it's going to make them take a little bit of damage per second. And while only being limited to one, we can make this fissure do quite a lot of interesting things. So first, what I want to talk about is going to be the Chaos Bolt's interaction. So what we could do is we can pick ourselves Stygian Current, which is going to make it so the spirits come out of the fissure 50% faster. And then we could pick up Chaotic Rupture, which is going to make it so 60% of the spirits are instead going to be replaced by Cast of Chaos Bolt. And the thing about this is these Chaos Bolts are going to use your Chaos Bolt tree. So what we can do here is we can go with the bleeding version of Chaos Bolt, which has automatic Rip Bloods and automatic Bone Curses. And instead of us manually casting the Chaos Bolts, we can instead be casting Chaotic Fissure. And then the spirits that come out of it will instead cast Chaos Bolts, which will then curse things for us and will bleed things for us and will automatically cast Rip Bloods for us, which can potentially be a really strong way to play Bleed Chaos Bolt, because this might potentially give you substantially more total cast speed on your Chaos Bolt than you could potentially get by actually pressing the skill yourself. You also pick up of Gloom and Flames, which is right next to all this, which is going to give you 2 fissures at once, one forward and one backwards, which effectively means you're going to double the amount of spirits that you're going to get per fissure cast. And that means you're going to double the amount of Chaos Bolts that you get, which means on a boss, you're going to apply so many bleeds and you are going to be able to abuse the free hit damage of Bone Curse to do a silly amount of damage very, very quickly. The nice thing about this whole synergy is we can go over to the right and pick up Mantle of Flames, which is going to give us a lot of ignite chance, as well as giving us any sort of ignite chance we have as ignite per second, meaning that fissure can ignite with the damage over time because it is a damage over time skill. And while doing this, we can then pick up Blood Gulch, which turns all that ignite chance into bleed chance and turns the skill into a physical skill, meaning we can scale it the same exact way as we can scale Chaotic Bolts. And that means the spirits that are going to come from the fissure itself are going to then apply bleeds themselves on top of it. The other thing you can do with this is pick up Chronicles of Ruin, which is right next to all this, which is not only going to make the torment last longer from the spirits, but also make it so other ailments are going to last 40% longer, meaning your bleeds are effectively going to do 40% more damage from the fissure. Now, the final thing to mention here, which might be a bummer to all this, is the fissure's mana cost, as it does have a 45 mana cost requirement, which is only going to get worse with Of Gloom and Flames, which is going to increase the mana cost by 80%. Now, this isn't really that bad because we have Fragile Crust. What it's going to do is it's going to reduce the mana cost of it by a flat 12, which is going to do quite a lot to help you with dealing with said mana problems, as well as refunding you 18% of the cost whenever there's a rare enemy or a boss by you, meaning that you could potentially just wait until you find rare enemies to cast this and then clear everything around the rare enemy. And then bosses, your mana costs aren't going to be that bad. Not only that, but Chaotic Bolt actually kind of takes care of all of your mana problems for you, because we can go pick up Devour the Damned, which is going to make it so we gain 2 mana every single time the bolts hit a cursed enemy. And because we are going to go down here to pick up Revere and we're going to pick up another affliction, it's very easy to just simply pick up Cursed Blood and then make our way over to Devour the Damned to completely fix our mana problems for barely any extra passive points. So with that, and with us having 2 rifts that are going to spam a lot of Chaos Bolts, the Chaos Bolts by themselves should pretty much completely take care of your mana problems. And if anything, you most likely might be mana positive playing this build. Now, the other really cool way to play Fissure is going to actually be to focus on those spirits and to focus on the Torment Curse that the skill itself actually applies. What we could do is we can pick up Spirit Gale, which would make it so that any of the spirits that automatically seek enemies and torment them have a 50% chance to then go seek another enemy when the spirits die. When we pair that with 50% more spirits through Stygian Current and the travel node of Severed Wards, which is going to give us a lot of necrotic res shredding, those spirits themselves should do a pretty good job of clearing. And we can then pair it with Damned Waters, which is going to make it so every single one of those spirits are going to inflict 3 stacks of Damned. There's going to be a lot of extra DPS, especially if you scale the Damned. And the broken thing here is we can then get Twisted Waves, which is going to make it so the torment that is applied by the spirits are going to do 3% more damage per 2% uncapped necrotic resistances. And Acolytes is a class that very easily can stack a lot of necrotic resistance. So that means if you go to 1000% necrotic resistance, you're going to get yourself 1.5k% more damage for your torments. Now, hitting 1000 necrotic resistance is a little bit far-fetched, but if you can stack a lot of necrotic res, you can get yourself some silly damage on these torments. And then if you scale it from there any further with any sort of necrotic damage increase or any sort of damage over time increase, your necrotic curses can do a lot of damage. Overall, I think all the skills are really interesting and I think they're really strong from Warlock. And I'm so excited about the Chaos Bolt Chthonic Fissure setup with auto Rip Bloods and auto curses, which I think is just going to do a very, very large amount of damage. And I think it's going to just be an absolute breeze to level with. Next up, let's talk about the Warlock passive tree. Now, I don't want to go over every single point because it'll take a while to get through all these. So I just want to give you a quick TLDR of the interesting points that are going to make Warlock special. Now, the first thing to mention here is there's going to be a lot of nodes that give you a overload when you meet the requirements of it for each ailment. So for example, here with Cauldron of Blood, we are going to get bleed overload if we have 25 total bleeds on any enemies within 15 meters of us. Another example is we would get poison overload if we get 25 total poisons within enemies within 15 meters of us. We're going to get damned overload if we get 20 stacks of damned within enemies within 15 meters of us. You get the points, but there's going to be one of these for every damage over time. You have bleed overload, poison overload, damned overload, and ignite overload. And what these are going to do is they're going to give you some sort of cool effect if you can actually hit the threshold. So in the example of bleed overload, not only will you automatically cast a rip blood at 5 nearby enemies, but if you end up picking up crimson favors, you are then going to do a free rip blood every second that you have bleed overload. So if you can proc it once, you will get 12 free rip bloods, as well as the initial burst of 5 onto enemies. And this doesn't seem to have a cooldown. So if I were to get 25 bleed sacks again, presumably this means I can refresh my bleed overload, which means I'll immediately do 5 more rip bloods onto nearby enemies. The poison one is also pretty cool. If you hit 25 stacks, you will create a Defiling Nova, which just expands outwards and it poisons everything around you. And while you have the overload buff yourself, every time you press your potion, all of your poison sacks are going to then be spread up to 2 nearby enemies per enemy, effectively allowing you to stack a lot of poison on an enemy, press your potion flask, and then have all that just be spread out, press it again, have it spread again, press it again, and get a lot of AoE clear through using your potions, which I think is really, really cool, especially when you pair it with the fact that Rapid Concoction is going to give you ward when you use your potion. It's going to make you a little bit tanky, and it's going to give you mana back, allowing your life flasks to effectively turn into mini mana flasks. Other than that, we have some other really strong generic nodes that I think we're going to see in quite a lot of builds. For example, we have Spiteful Decay, which is generic damage over time and health, which is also going to give you 4% more damage to anything that is cursed if you put 5 points into the skill, which given pretty much every single Warlock build is going to include a curse in it, it's just a free 4% damage. I did mention this briefly while we were talking about skills, but Cultist Mind is going to look absolutely cracked. Not only does it give you 8 intelligence, which is great for intelligence stackers, given that a lot of Warlock looks like it's going to want to stack intelligence, but it's also going to end up giving you 1 mana per intelligence that you have, allowing you to have a pretty big mana pool for free just for being a Warlock and just for being an Instacker. We also have the Word of Malevolence Imperishable Doom Herald package, which I think is going to see quite a lot of play in a lot of builds, especially Word of Malevolence and Imperishable, because these 2 nodes together are going to make early game word stackers substantially stronger. It's going to make end game word stackers have an ungodly amount of word. So what Word of Malevolence does is it's going to give you a 75 word decay threshold. Now, word is a little bit complicated in Last Epoch, but the TLDR is word is effectively energy shield from Path of Exile, except there is no cap to how much you can have of it. The only limiting factor of how much word you can have is just how fast it decays. And the more word you have, the faster it goes away. So you're having more decay threshold means you're going to be able to give yourself a bigger word pool before your word starts going away. If you want to very quickly look in game, I am playing a low life word stacker. And as you can see, I am currently sitting at 6,500 word. As you can see, it's consistently flickering between 6 and 5. What's happening here is my ward is consistently trying to drain itself, but it's hit equilibrium with my ward regeneration to where I can maintain 6,500 ward. What having more ward decay threshold would mean is that my equilibrium would, instead of being at 6,500, potentially be at 7 or 8,000. The other really nice thing here is it's going to give you 5 ward per 2 intelligence while channeling. So what that means is it has insane synergy with Ghostflame, where you can gain a lot of ward based on your mana, and this could give you an ungodly amount of ward if you reduce the channel cost of it by quite a lot, so you keep your mana up high as long as possible. And because it's while channeling, you could also then use Ghostflame as a utility skill with Disdain and with Enfeebled Prey to get a lot of damage reduction while channeling it. Not only that, but this is going to lead directly into Doom Herald, which is going to give you another 24% reduced damage taken while channeling, meaning that overall, not only are you going to get an ungodly amount of ward and you're going to be able to use Ghostflame as a way to heal yourself really quickly for word-based builds, you're going to have a very, very, very high amount of damage reduction while doing that. Not only that, but then you also get Imperishable, which is going to be really, really busted. Imperishable, if you put 3 points into it, is going to give you 1% ward decay threshold per 1 necro resistance, which means for 3 points, it's just another 75 ward decay threshold, just like Malevolence is. Overall, this package right here is just going to make ward builds and instackers, especially if we combine with the Cultist Mind, really, really strong on a Warlock. And because this is before the halfway mark, that means that any Acolyte build can go to the Warlock tree and pick these up as well, as the first half of every mastery tree is able to be allocated by every single mastery, no matter which one you pick. Moving on next to the Warlock only points, we do have some really strong options here as well. First, we have Wither, which allows you to apply Wither if you aren't playing a Soul Thief build. And if you put 5 points into this, anything that is withered is going to do 8% less damage to you, giving you just a free 8% less damage taken for only 5 points, which is a really strong option given that you just need to hit something once to take 8% less damage. We also have the Chaotic Strikes and Wreak Havoc package. Chaotic Strikes is going to give you a 5% chance to deal double damage, as well as an additional 1% chance per curse that you have on enemies. And Wreak Havoc is just going to give you 40% crit multi and an additional 30% crit multi for any crits that happen during double damage from Chaotic Strikes. What I think is going to happen here is I think we are going to see Chains of the Betrayer, Chaotic Bolt setups with Chance of Snow for the additional chance for double damage, also deciding to go crits and picking up both Chaotic Strikes and Wreak Havoc. And if you end up getting a crit on a double damage Chaos Bolt, you are going to potentially be chunking endgame bosses for a very silly portion of their total health. Lastly, we have Fleeting Crone, which in my opinion is going to be a must-have in every single Warlock setup. You have a chance to gain haste for 2 seconds when you kill a cursed enemy or hit a cursed boss or rare enemy, and it's going to make the haste on you 50% better. This means you are going to be very, very fast as a Warlock, and considering that every single skill has a way to apply curse, and pretty much no matter what Warlock build you're going to be picking is going to have a curse in it, that means that you're always going to be gaining haste, and that means Warlock is going to be a very, very fast build, and that is going to be very exciting. And lastly, we have Aspect of Death, which I think is going to be kind of hilarious, and it's going to be very fun to see which builds get to abuse this. What Aspect of Death is going to do is going to give you 15% more life, which is just great by itself, and it's going to make you do 0.5% more damage per negative ailment on you up to a cap of 90, which means that Aspect of Death, if fully stacked, is a generic 45% more damage global buff that would apply to both dots and hits. Now, obviously, you would have to be able to deal with 90 stacks of damned or poisoned or bleeding or ignite, whatever you put on yourself. And there are plenty of ways to do this, and Warlock does offer quite a few ways for you to self-inflict these ailments on you. And it'll be really interesting to see if someone can make a build where they either have enough leech or they have some sort of word regeneration setup that can live all of these debuffs on them while also being able to apply them at a faster rate to be able to abuse the potential 45% more damage that it gives you. And that's all we have for the Warlock Mastery. Honestly, I'm very excited for it, and I'm excited for some of the builds that can pop up from it. You can definitely expect some sort of Fissure Autobomber from me before the game comes out, as I am very, very excited for the skill, and I think it's going to be very fun, and it's going to be very strong. And honestly, I am a massive fan of automatic builds, and I'm a really big fan of Autobombers in general. Lastly, if you do wish to play Last Epoch for yourself, you can go and pre-order the game right now. There are going to be 3 different versions of the game. Now, the game is not pay to win in the slightest at all. There is literally 0 pay to win. I'm going to use PoE here as an example, where all you can do in this game is simply buy microtransactions just like you can in PoE. There will never be any pay to win, and it's going to feel very much like PoE in terms of monetization style. But if you would like to pick up the standard edition or any of the other editions, you can pick them up, and there'll be a link for them in the description below. And if you want to, you can also pick them up on my Nexus store, which will give you a Steam key, just like if you were to have bought it directly on Steam, and I end up getting a cut of it myself. So if you want to support your local e-girl, I would be more than happy if you did so. Other than that, cuties, if you have any other questions, please feel free to let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. I hope you cuties enjoyed the preview on Warlock, and in my opinion, I feel like this class is going to be unbelievably strong, and I feel like it's going to be a really top tier S pick for the launch of the game, which is going to be on February 21st. And if you want to see myself play Warlock when the game does come out, I'll be more than happy to see you on Twitch. I stream every single day, and I'll be doing a lot more Last Epoch content over the upcoming days to prepare everyone for the launch of the game. Other than that, I hope you cuties enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.